Primobolan V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Primobolan V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code, and you are not mistaken. That is not Lexi. Cory, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Paul, I'm glad we're doing this. I don't know about you. On my end, I had a lot of requests for us to do some kind of collaboration, something long form. So after this, we're gonna have to get together, have you on my podcast as well. But thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I went to message you, I thought I had your phone number and I didn't. So when I went to message you on Instagram, I realized like our first conversation was like 2016.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
I have followed you pretty much since the inception of my first exposure to bodybuilding. I mean, like we're talking back into like bodybuilding.com forum days.
Oh,
Big
wow.
fan of
Okay.
Lauren Conlon, Lane Norton. I mean, like you guys, I would say collectively really, I would say shaped my values getting into the sport. Um, but that's something, we all have like kind of seen the change like within Bikini. I was really grateful for like to you personally, like virtually, through the online sphere for that
Well, we
because
had a lot of good conversations in person over the years. I was there when you got your pro card and won the overall at Junior USA's. I was very excited for that. I was also there when you missed a few times, so it was just, it's been very nice to see, although the sport and things have changed and we've all evolved, we still kind of have this bond that I think it's going to be forever, right? Something that I've noticed over the years is I've been there for so many big moments in the sport and in people's lives. It's fun to look back on. Um, but you've actually studied, like you are an RN, correct? So were you in school studying for that, or did you go back to learn when you got more interested in bodybuilding?
so I actually went back to nursing school. This was 2020. My background's in business management as well as videography, social media marketing, and I mean, it really was just a great way to punctuate to the career I had in cinematography. When things started shutting down at that point, I was like, I want a more stable career path, and I want something that um, through what I'm doing with fitness, because at the time I'd already been coaching, I was like, I want something that's going to enhance what I'm doing, and make me a better coach for my clients. And what better way is than bringing more of a formal education to this space?
It's missing. It's severely lacking. And I'll be honest, Evan in Orlando works with a compounding pharmacy now, and he's connected me with some really quality hormone therapy clinics, and that's become a nice addition. But there's still a gap between what's legal and what's healthy and what's up on the upfront, and then what competitors are being persuaded, asked, and highly suggested or told they need to do.
Mhm.
And so this is where I kind of feel like the sport, I don't know, like it's just, I feel like it's at a breaking point for a lot of women.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, like you have even outside of the sport, there's just such a big gap in female endocrinology, and what providers are able to offer women who are, seriously struggling, with just like the natural process of aging. But then you see within our sport, now there are several outlets where individuals have pretty much easy access to whatever drugs that they want. So I think ultimately that creates this perfect storm of individuals who, are incentivized to get results faster. They have the access, and then you have private businesses that are incentivized to provide said drugs at a high price point.
That was going to be my big thing is a lot of these clinics, and especially with my clients that go to some of these clinics too, the amount that they recommend they take and the compounds that they take is kind of baffling at times. And then everything else they want to toss on top of it, right? It's like, I mean, I coach a lot of like 21, 22, 23-year-old girls, and they'll go to clinics and they'll immediately try to put them on TRT immediately, like at 21 years old, and then progesterone, and then everything else. I'm like, you are 21 and 22 years old.
And oftentimes, I mean, like what I see is it's this inventory list. Someone will
Yep.
get a basic panel. Oftentimes, the hormonal aspect of that is very incomplete. They will then send that to the client and be like, oh, this is kind of out of range, or this is kind of on the lower side. Here's how we can optimize your testosterone with, TRT and L-carnitine and these other supplements that are marked up 300%. So I think absolutely, Paul, to your point, like, we're at a point in the space as coaches and as athletes where it's like you're messing with drugs that have a very narrow therapeutic index. And I think for a lot of individuals, they have no concept of the consequences of abusing these drugs. And it's becoming more and more common to see these drugs in place at doses that, objectively are not needed.
That's my concern. And so so take me back. I think, was it 2021 that you won the overall at Junior USA's?
Yep, that's right.
2021, South Carolina, right after COVID. I imagine it was a pretty big show. Do you remember the number of athletes that were at that show?
It's about 130, I think collectively, all
Yep.
classes. So, I mean,
Yeah.
uh,
All bikini. You're talking about bikini, 130 bikini.
no, sorry. Actually, no, I mean, like, if we're thinking back to numbers, I know there were about 20 in my height class. And I mean, like, what we're talking 6, 7 height classes.
Okay.
So it's still a good amount. And I mean, like, historically, Junior USA's, they would say they've had less turnout than some of the other shows. But I think for this year, it was still a really large turnout, especially because a lot of people had their shows canceled the prior year unexpectedly or had them moved.
Yeah, I actually started
Yeah.
tracking numbers last year after I went to Junior Nationals. If I can find my Excel spreadsheet. When
Okay.
I went to when I went to Junior USA's last year, you know the feeling when you go to a bodybuilding show and you see people walking around and their cover-ups and they got their tan and you can smell it. I was at the show and I think I had 3 or 4 girls competing, maybe more. And I was like, where is everyone? There was no one walking around. I didn't get the sense that there was a bodybuilding show happening. And when the show started, I went backstage and I looked at the list. There was 52 competitors at a national show. And I was immediately like, wait, what's happening right now? Where is everyone? Right.
Uh,
And so now typically that is the smallest national show because they give out 4 pro cards in the overall instead of, top 2 or everybody. And it's early in the year, it's in May. But, I tracked it to like 2018, 2019. There was 200 competitors at that show typically.
mm,
So, of course, my brain was like, okay, I'm going to track this the whole year and just see what's going on. And the total number of competitors crossing the national stage last year was around 700 in the open. And
wow.
at the peak of 2018, 2019, they were upwards of 16 to 1800 a year between all the national shows. So we're talking about a drastic decline in numbers. Now, what's kind of covered that up is the fact that there's been an increase in some shows in the masters competitors.
Mm,
So, but when you're coaching open bikini and you're used to seeing 30, 40 girls in a class, and all of a sudden there's like 12, 10, you know,
yeah.
it was shocking to me. And so maybe you have some insight on this. Is this a reaction to women not going, that's what I want for my goals?
Mm, I almost want to challenge that because I guess from my perspective, I think one of the reasons specifically with Junior USA's, I think at least my perception around this is there isn't that same opportunity to get the pro card. And
Sure.
I think a lot of women specifically with that show, at least individuals I've spoken with, are a little turned off from that. Hey, I could win
Yep.
my class, but I'm not technically awarded that pro status, which is understandable. But I also think in some ways is a good way to get to calibrate where that athlete is at relative to the pro league. But then, yeah, when we start to see the progression, gosh, even since 21, the physiques are dense. And I mean,
Yeah.
I find myself talking clients out of competing at the national level without taking more time off. So I think to your point, a lot of women, I wouldn't necessarily say aren't into that new look that's, kind of developed in the last several years, but rather they're having to spend more time doing it. And, what I'm, very privy to is they're doing it with a shitload of drugs. And at this point, I'm like, hey, like you've been in the sport maybe a year, like you haven't even stepped foot on a national stage. Like, why are we running multiple compounds at doses that, are very far from what I would consider a modest entry level to PEDs?
I do agree with you that the coaching and the athletes themselves have gotten smarter, right? You're not just putting athletes on a national stage that aren't going to be competitive. I think in the early days when I was coaching 2016, 2017, I would see girls regularly do 3, 4, 5 national shows, right? Whereas now they're being more strategic, they're taking time off and they're getting on the national stage when they are going to be competitive. And even
Right.
myself as a coach, I often talk athletes, Evan, I know we've had this conversation.
Absolutely.
We talk athletes out of competing at nationals until they're going to be competitive because that is, I mean, I think it's $350 just for your entry fee, and you haven't even paid V for the makeup, you know?
Yeah. And to get 10 seconds on stage for most people, right? And, you
Yeah.
know, to your point too, Corey, I remember a couple of years ago too, especially when I was still an amateur and I would go to shows and I would stand on stage and, there'd be 35 guys in my class and maybe a quarter of them should probably have been on that national stage at that point. The rest of them probably shouldn't have. And I don't think it's quite to that level with bikini. I think it's still there's some that probably need more time, but the winners typically are quite good. And even some of these local shows we've seen recently, the people that are winning the shows and winning their classes are quite good. But everyone else, there's like that little bit of decline after that. So you very well could be right that people are waiting a little bit longer. But I agree too. People are in a hurry, right? They're in a giant hurry, and they don't think long term with this. And a lot of coaches, again, like they get paid. A lot of these coaches get paid from all angles, right? And when you get paid from all angles, you push more things, you make more money, you get more commission, you get people results quicker, transformations are better, they make more money. And I think that drives a lot of it.
No, and I think it makes sense to all of us. One of the things that I've specifically seen in the last 2 years is that shift away from, simply hitting conditioning or even being a little too conditioned and then like kind of slipping through the cracks, getting a higher placing only to be told, hey, you need more muscle. I feel like right now at the national level, at least going off of last year's wins and these girls that are, getting ready for the national stage this year, is that they're not just showing up with gnarly conditioning. I mean, they're showing up with incredible density, which I can think back to 21 when I won my pro card. One of the things that I talked to the judges about afterwards, they're like, hey, you're undersized, you've got great shape, the package you're bringing is good. And if you keep nailing the conditioning, you're probably going to do well at almost any show you show up at, just because that is one of the bottlenecks for a lot of athletes. Now, I feel like even when we look at second call outs at the national stage, you're seeing a lot of girls that, a few years back, that would be, I would say, pro card winning conditioning. And it was harder to come by. Whereas now I think a lot of the athletes have nailed that. Yet what they're getting told is like, you don't have that density, you don't have that projection to the glutes, which I mean, like just looking at the winners, it's like across the board, it's really, really impressive. And it's amazing to see the evolution in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
but it what
it's
cost too
impressive.
with it.
Yeah, well, and that's the question. It's impressive when you see the athletes, especially in person. Um, but my concern is just the numbers, the drastic decline in numbers from show to show has been startling. When you're typically used to seeing 30, 40 competitors in a class. And, I remember seeing girls that had just won overalls get third, fourth call outs at nationals. And now I'm seeing girls that did true novice 2 weeks ago in first call outs at nationals. So I still think that the winners, the girls that are winning these shows are standing out. But I think there is a bigger gap between the winners and the girls that are not placing in that top two, top three position, just with the naked eye test.
Yeah.
I will say, that to me was what we noticed a lot last year, Evan.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned that like a universe, right? I mean, the open girls that would come out, we pretty much picked the winner directly when they walked out. before it even hit the front post.
Yeah, Universe was one of the most shocking shows because although their numbers looked normal, there was a couple open classes that had 8 girls.
Yeah.
Wow.
Before because
Before they
Universe,
brought
what
the
they do
masters in.
is they walk all the masters out first because they've already been on stage for their 40 and 35 class. Then the only people that do individuals are the open division. So then I would start counting 1, 2, and then 8, and then they'd put them on the line. I'd be like, so there's 8 girls in open D that were open only. So like it started to like click to me that like, okay, this isn't just a junior USA's that went from 160 to 52 people in a couple of years. It's now the whole national scene has shifted. So, I think obviously we talked to a lot of girls about the price of competing, the economy of it, the more intelligent approach as coaches. Okay, let's not just put somebody on a national stage that's not ready to be competitive. Um, but I've also had a lot of girls, Cory, blatantly tell me like I'm not interested in looking like a pro.
Yeah.
I
No.
like looking like that. I like looking at it. It's impressive, but I do not want to do that. And the most notable things to me, and I'll never forget my first Olympia. I was blessed. I've had 8 girls do the Olympia now. My first Olympia was the most shocking when I went backstage. That first year, for whatever reason, they let us all go back there, and Daraja and I were back there. And the depth of the voices is what shook me. I was like, "Whoa!" I had not picked up on that until they were all in one room. That has gotten worse. So I'd like to talk to you about, because this is where, as a coach, my responsibility is to make sure that I'm doing the best job for my athletes. And I am pro performance enhancing stuff, right? I've been a big fan of oxandrolone. I've seen benefits from multiple compounds, but where the responsibility between the athlete and their goals and their coach, and those conversations can be difficult.
Right. And I think when I started talking about PEDs more openly, I mean, I started posting videos, let me see, in 23.
Yeah.
And that's when I like really just hit that on the nose. And then my whole feed turned into just these educational videos. And I knew at the time, I'm like, there's a need for this. Absolutely. Because from really the pro league standpoint, from bikini professionals, there's no one really being fully transparent or even discussing like the risks that come with these compounds. But it didn't really resonate like how much this is needed. And that was honestly, it was, appalling to me to talk to individuals for coaching, purposes or consultation purposes who realistically, it's like there are so many bad protocols being given. There are far and few ones that I would say, okay, this does make sense for that athlete. Yet I have girls coming to me, they're like, yeah, this is my 6th cycle that I've run like this. This is the 3rd coach that I'm on that has, a very similar protocol that, I mean, like objectively is just heavy handed. Yet that individual in a lot of cases is struggling to keep up with the density requirements or the conditioning requirements. So I think that really surprised me to see, like, because I figured, I'm like, okay, there's some people misusing them, and this would be good information to share with individuals and to have kind of in the space. But it really, like, it didn't land that, like, wow, like there's far and few coaches doing things with the athlete's best interest in mind. So, I mean, that, like, really, I guess if we can consider it more of like my mission is just to not necessarily dissuade people from using PEDs, but it's rather to make sure that they have the information that they can give informed consent. Because, like, in the medical setting, it's like
Yeah.
you have to understand what the drug does. And even if the risks are very unlikely, even if it's very small, you have to understand that that still is a possibility. There's no coercion in the medical setting. Like, the provider has to actually sign off on the fact that, like, you get this and you've been informed. That's not happening in the coach client dynamic.
I think something too that's kind of scary is, and I don't call people out individually with any of this stuff, but people that paint themselves as experts in this and super educated and understanding everything. And I look at some of the stuff and I'm like, you literally read this online. Like, I've seen girls that are on like 1 IU of GH, and for some reason their coach is putting them on long acting insulin.
Oh gosh,
Like,
Kevin, the insulin
why?
kills me.
Why?
For someone who's,
It,
yeah, no, for someone who's on, let's say 120 grams of carbs, or, My client who eats like the highest is seriously like 2,600, 27. Yet I've had girls come to me who are like, well, this girl's using insulin in her prep. She's using it in her off season. I'm like, why is this becoming something that is just standardized as like, well, is that giving her a competitive edge? But sadly, that is the association I think oftentimes people make is athletes are using X compound for this amount of time at this dose, and they place well. So they make that association with just the compound use
Yeah.
itself.
I think a lot of that, and I can say this because he talks openly about it. I think a lot of that comes from like the J3 University side of things with it, where they say like do everything like the peptides or the insulin first before you go any anabolic route with it for females. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from, if I had to take a guess at it.
Right. I think and for listeners who aren't familiar, I think like John Jewett, I mean, like I went through J3U. I mentored under him for about a year, and he really did open my eyes to a lot of the possibilities outside of just Anavar that could be used for bikini competitors. But what was interesting is during that process, I mean, like he lays out the framework, and like this is something like I think he would agree too, is that like the framework for non-androgenic PEDs was never developed specifically for bikini competitors, and it was never intended to be this thing that we just immediately overhaul and put all of these compounds in place, especially when we're talking about a division that realistically a bulk of the work should be done naturally, and it can be done naturally. When we're talking about these other divisions that are more muscular, there is baseline level of acceptance, I would say, that most athletes are agreeing to upon deciding to pursue this endeavor. But it was something like working with John, I was able to I wouldn't even, I would not go as far to say develop my own framework, but develop my own belief system around how these drugs should be implemented if they're going to at all. But always playing devil's advocate. Why wouldn't we put this drug in place? Is there a good reason to wait? And especially in the case where you have an athlete who wants to be in the sport for a long period of time and, pursue a career at the pro level. Paul, to your point, like going backstage and hearing the pitch drop from so many competitors that, I mean, largely are very young and, arguably have, 5 to 10 years left in the sport if they choose to. It's like that isn't how I think it should be, but sadly that's what it's become.
Yeah, the struggle I've had as a coach is, I'll say I was a slow adopter. I came from natural bodybuilding in my early years. I coached natural for many years. When I did start adopting things, it was very slowly. It was mostly just oxandrolone. Now there are multiple compounds I'm familiar with. And once I started noticing the benefits of low doses of oxandrolone and the lack of negatives, right? I wasn't having athletes with negative consequences, but I was also working through the protocols of a hormone therapy clinic. 8 weeks on, 4 weeks off is very common. Whereas I'll have a girl come to me on double the dosage that I would recommend for 6 months straight. And I think this is where we can get into some issues, because as a coach, I'm thinking of an athlete's 10 years ahead from now, right? Like, and the problem that we talked about, honestly, in the coaching space is if, I've had athletes give me 1 or 2 shows with them over the course of a year, have a great success, have one off time, and they're on to the next coach because the coach is in their DMs. So I get it. Like from a coaching perspective, some of these coaches are probably like, hey, I've got to like put my foot on the accelerator and get this person to the top right away. I've never been that type of a coach. I enjoy the process. If you're good, you're going to be successful. I've even said, with or without me, my job is to make you the best version of yourself. And the problem I've run into is I've been around the sport for too long. I've seen too much. After a decade of going to shows and going backstage and seeing a girl 1 year and then seeing her a year later, and she looks 5 years older and sounds like she's been smoking like 2 packs a day, it's like almost shocking. It's like, whoa, what are we doing here? And then now I'm already seeing girls do 2 or 3 seasons and retire from the sport, right? Instead of having a long career, they are in and out of the sport. You shouldn't win the Bikini Olympia and retire, which has happened multiple times.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up an important point here is like The vocal changes. That's one that when I kind of walk through clients around like deciding are they ready to use PEDs, one of the big things I'm just transparent about is like even at low doses, even within the cycle length that we can assume is very low risk, it's not guaranteed. So, in the case that someone is considering implementing an androgenic compound, it's like you have to understand vocal change. That's probably largely irreversible. And the only thing you can really do is discontinue the cycle. So that becomes problematic for athletes who are middle of prep, have the Olympia coming up, or have aspirations to continue competing, especially if their current vocal tone, their pitch is, what they define and what is included amongst what they consider to be feminine. The other aspect is anatomical changes. And I put out a video on like 5 irreversible effects, and yes, intentionally very like clickbaity. But the acne scarring, the facial hair growth, just like the weathering of the skin, which to your point is like seeing someone who looks like significantly older. These are things that, like, yes, in some form or fashion, or with like an individual with incredible genetics, maybe you can get treatments to reverse or slow some of that down. But again, now you're down this road that's thousands of dollars of cosmetic treatments to undo signs of aging that, like, realistically we could have avoided and were
Yeah.
done to fast track things.
Especially with women, the fillers,
The
I've
fillers.
noticed, they'll, to offset the change in like muscular, facial structure, chin, jaw, they'll add the fillers, and they'll also do like apps like Facetune and things like that. But when you see that in person, it's a different kind of, just, it's shocking when you haven't seen somebody in a year and they've made physical changes that you're like, okay, now listen, these are my friends, so I'm never going to talk about this openly about someone, but it's something that as a coach, it's been challenging for me, I'll be honest, because at one point I openly said my goal is to win the Bikini Olympia. I don't know that I'm comfortable saying that now because of what, I had a young lady 4th in the world at the Olympia as a natural athlete. I don't think that's possible anymore.
No, I would
Based
agree.
on what I'm seeing, the requirements are for muscle density, size, and I just don't know that that's possible anymore.
I think it's refreshing though. Like, I try to put myself in the position of athletes who are coming into the sport now, or maybe, are coming into the pro league now. Hearing that from someone like yourself, I think it takes a lot of courage, yes, but I think it also allows someone to calibrate their expectations. If simply being on the Olympia stage, if that is their, top aspiration, okay, this is going to take a long time with or without enhancements. And I think largely that's the message that both you and I have tried to put out in different forms or fashions, is that, like, even with doing everything correctly, even with amazing genetics, there is a lot of PED use. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all athletes should, jump on the bandwagon and, do it because another competitor who's successful has. Especially when we get into the risk, which outside of vocal changes, the anatomical changes, aside from facial changes, I mean, like, you're talking about clitoromegally, which, like, I know that's like a touchy subject, but it's like, that's something that a lot of women, they don't realize can change, and it can change very quickly, especially at higher dosages. So, I mean, I've gotten on so many calls where individuals, they, have expressed, they're like, I was expecting to see changes in my voice and how I sounded. That didn't come as quickly as other anatomical changes, which now make it very challenging in my relationship. They make it challenging for me to feel secure in my body. And those are things, especially hearing from women who are in their 20s. I'm like, it breaks my heart because it's like, I don't think that they had a conversation with their coach, honestly, prior to use, or even like with the discussion around extending the cycle or increasing the dose. I don't think at any point there was the consideration like, hey, we can do this, but it will come with a higher degree of risk.
Yeah. Well, I always look at it like it's a juice worth the squeeze, right? And it does it align with your goals, and are you willing to put a certain amount of risk into it? But like you said, there's risk with everything. And I never really considered what you were talking about before about an athlete being in the middle, like right near Olympia, and experiencing those voice changes. What are they supposed to do at that point?
Exactly.
Like, what are they supposed to do, right? they're not going to stop at that point because they're so close. They're so
And
close to it.
Well, then their
And then,
coach is
you
not
know, the
gonna
longer they're on it, the worse it's going to
the
get.
coach is not gonna be like, hey, let's pull back. We're 6 weeks out from the Olympia. Let's cycle off for a couple weeks and see how you feel. And then, um, so yeah, so I use the term on our podcast. I talk about this quite a bit, Corey. I call it summit fever. And it's a phenomenon where climbers have rules of engagement when they're climbing, like, in places where they could die. And yet people die all the time climbing. Why? Because when they get close to that summit, they change the rules of engagement. And I think the same thing happens with competitors. They go, I'm in this sport because I love to lift weights and I want to do a bodybuilding show. Cool. Oh, that girl that beat me, she looked good. What was that? Okay, she's been lifting for 5 years. So you start to apply these things to yourself to get you to where you want to go next. And there comes a point where a coach is going to say, well, you need to be on testosterone at this dose. You need to be on Anavar at this dose. You need to be on clenbuterol at this dose. They don't realize that when you combine all three of that, you are now essentially giving yourself male hormonal patterns that are going to have irreversible implications. There's also something that I've noticed where these competitors spend time together. Their coaches, them, they all start to look and sound alike, so it becomes normalized. Then they go out into the public and they are outside of that. And that's something that I've noticed as well. And I don't know. It's just a conversation that I want to have. It's not necessarily that it's good or bad. It's just a conversation.
And I think I love that you touched on that. And I think it is important to continue to emphasize, like, it's not my place or anyone's place to really define what feminine is for an individual athlete. I have professional bikini competitor friends who are like, hey, I've seen anatomical changes. I know my voice has changed. I'm okay with it. Those things don't define me, and I'm not bothered by it. And very much in that case, it does have you wonder, like, have they changed the rules of engagement? But to them, it's very much, it's not my place to be like, yes, you've realized you should stop, even though it might be very apparent that those changes have already occurred. Whereas someone, and I'll use myself as an example, I already have, I don't have a sing-songy voice. It's not very high pitched. Like in choir, I was never someone to hit high notes. So I am very insecure about any potential change. And exactly what you said before is like, if we're getting close to show, preserving that runway, knowing that, like, what if there is a compound in place that, is putting me at risk? Am I just going to discontinue right before the show? Probably not, especially if that's involved in creating the look that we want. So rather than burn through these cycles or burn through this exposure that we have before things start to change, why not prophylactically preserve it? Why not keep those cards basically set aside until it is absolutely needed? So let's say, you're 2 weeks out from Olympia or your national show, and like you start to notice, okay, I don't know if things are changing, but I'm going to ride it out through this show. But after that, I kind of have to make a decision. Am I okay with this continuing to progress? And it very much is my day to day where I talk to individuals. I had a girl coached by top coach getting ready for the fit model division. 80 milligrams of Primo, 20 of Anavar. She's 18 weeks out. And this was a
20 milligrams of
What?
Anavar and Primo?
Yes.
18 weeks out?
Like, the first part of the conversation was like, I don't even know where to attack this. I'm like, okay, like the fact that we have both these in, and this is fit model, this is to get you into the entry level. But the fact that, like, these compounds are layered on top of each other in such an excessive fashion. And obviously through the consultation, I did my best to educate while also being respectful, but frankly saying, like, hey, like, these are very high doses. And like, there's a very good likelihood, like at this point, if you're going to have them in now, I'd be shocked if your coach just pulled them out 6 weeks before your show. They're probably going to continue to have you take these all the way through show. So keep that in mind. If you're going to have high doses, like, do you have an idea of the length of time, the duration of use that your coach plans to put these in place? And in her case, amateur competitor getting ready for the national stage. So it's like, you're not talking about just an 18-week prep to this first show. There's probably going to be more shows after that, which is why I think having that timeline and having it very clear around how these anabolics are being used, I think that's paramount, especially for those competitors that are going to be more heavy handed.
Let's give Cory, let's give
That's
some
wild.
actual, I would love to hear your thoughts on a typical consultation with, let's just say you've got a competitor who's been competing, who's been lifting for a couple years, and they want to start a beginner cycle as a female that would give them some positive results and minimize any negative outcomes. Give me some, like, because I have mine,
Yeah.
but I'd love to just hear your thoughts.
So, first and foremost, when we look at anabolics, if the client needs them, and this is like a big part of the assessment, making sure that there's an actual need and they're not doing so many things wrong that frankly we can pull out progress through.
So let's talk about some of those things, because that's what I wanted to point out about these
Yeah.
coaches, between the nutrition and the training being the drugs are almost a band-aid for terrible practices in those
It,
areas.
not to hop in here, but the amount of girls I've worked with that have been on high anabolics and I look at their training and they send me training videos, my jaw hits the floor. They don't even know how to do a lat pull down, much less it's crazy. Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Or
Go
they're
ahead.
doing 4 lower body days, not even with any proximity to true failure. They're like, I
Yeah.
don't squat. I'm just doing kickbacks or band loops. That's their workout. And it's like, okay, like we have runway. And I almost see it as an opportunity then when someone has a really poor training design, or just doesn't have a good understanding of hitting that proximity to failure that's going to cause that adaptation. There's the training side of it that I feel like has really allowed me to get progress out of athletes
Yep.
naturally. Then there's the adherence and consistency side of things that, I mean, like we'll lump diet and recovery fatigue management. The athlete who is more of a hobbyist or recreationalist, I am strongly considering, I'm like, hey, like if we were to throw an anabolic in, like what is this going to do considering like you struggle to maintain any real kind of routine, whether that be through the diet or their sleep schedule. So I look at almost like these levers that essentially anabolics they can enhance if all these things are being done correctly, but without those aspects being executed, I mean, realistically, we're just using the anabolic to compensate for really shitty program design or shitty execution.
So this is where the first time I remember being very impressed with oxandrolone or Anavar was I had a competitor who was very good, great shape. We were getting first call outs like fifth, sixth at nationals consistently. And she was like, Coach, I want to try oxandrolone. We did an 8-week cycle and she ended up turning pro 8 weeks later with, she was already dialed in on her nutrition, her training, she was in such a good spot. And we basically were able to kind of reverse her. Like I wasn't cutting her, her training improved, her muscle fullness improved, and she ended up turning pro at the next show. And that was one of the first times that I went, there's something to this, because she had, it was a low dose. It was 10 milligrams and we were splitting it, 5 a.m., 5 p.m. And she just had such a good response. And what I found was a lot of my athletes were interested in this, but they were almost afraid to have the conversation with me. Um, but I'm I always tell them I'm not judgmental on that front. Like that's something you're interested in. So I've had to educate myself to get better at this. Um, but I'm still finding, what Evan and I talked about, hormone therapy clinics have an agenda. Other coaches that I want to learn from have an agenda. The other coaches that I trust and respect are such minimalists that when you find out what they're doing, some athletes will be like, well, they're liars. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're just keeping their athletes off stage longer. They're focusing on their training and nutrition and having them be better athletes. So they don't have to rely on 20 or 30 milligrams of Anavar to keep an athlete looking like a bodybuilder. Um,
And
so
I see this even on the open. I'm friends with a lot of high level athletes, and if people knew what they actually took, they would think they're lying. They would
right.
think they're lying because they don't take near as much as what everybody thinks they take.
No, I completely agree. So, Paul, to circle back to the question you had asked prior to, what I guess what is the entry point for an
Yeah, like a
individual who's
starter, like an
yeah.
Yeah.
idea where you should see some benefit.
So I'm more of the belief system. I don't love starting with Anavar, and it's only in the case where that individual has the ability to um, put their hormones in a better place. Now, that's not to say, oh, hey, you need to start TRT before you start Anavar. But there are athletes who are heavily suppressed their levels are very, like, clinically very low. Not just their circulating androgen, so testosterone, DHEA, but then you also look at their estradiol, and especially in these in contest preps, I mean, like, it's expected to see low levels of sex hormones. So when I think about the best use for an anabolic, it's to build muscle. It is to drive performance, yes, and in a contest prep, maybe it's to alter the look cosmetically to, offset maybe some of that depletion, that flatness that athlete's going to get. But realistically, if we're trying to build density, I want it to be used in the off season. That's like, best case scenario, plan A. Can it be used in a contest prep? Sure. Yes. But I think then the duration should go down unless it's extenuating circumstances, unless it's an athlete who's right on the cusp and like it will actually make a difference. But for listeners, that's probably not you. No offense. It's probably a select few individuals who fall into that category where it actually will make a difference. So not not to shy away from HRT, but I do think that we need to have labs to get a better sense of, can you actually take advantage of that anabolic? Because the anabolics in themselves, they're going to cause suppression of sex hormones. So when we start looking at your ability to potentiate muscle growth, we need estradiol for that. So not all coaches, but a lot of coaches in our space, they are using things to lower the activity of estrogen at the receptor site and then overall just bring it down. I think this is a misstep because I think that I've seen a lot of athletes who do better with at least adequate levels of circulating estrogen. Now, that's also something that we need to weigh against whether or not their progesterone is rising, because even someone with normal levels of estrogen, if their progesterone's too low, that can then present as estrogen dominance in their physique. So not to get too
Like
much
a waterier look, more watery.
Softer.
exactly, even if they're technically within range, if that progesterone's not in balance. So this isn't unexpected. This is something that I do see a lot of, is that estradiol being suppressed during contest prep. So I think even minimally having some kind of precursor in place. So if it's DHEA, if it's pregnenolone, to just cover you, almost like just basic insurance, because we know that these levels are going to go down initially. I would say that's like truly like a starting point. Then past there, past that, looking at TRT, looking to see if there's any need for it. In the case that the athlete doesn't have a need for it, then okay, we don't put it in place. If we're looking at Anavar, I mean, I typically start people at 2.5 or 5 milligrams. It's actually very rare that I escalate someone to 10 milligrams. I have, but at the same time, it's been in a case where the athlete's like, I've used this before. I don't feel comfortable starting at 5. I've seen good results on 2.5, but for listeners, they have to understand that like there can be a discrepancy in quality, even if you're getting a prescription, even if you're going through an HRT clinic. So if I can
Yes.
convince someone to go on 2.5 first, that's what I'm going to push for. If we start at 5, I mean, we can assess, but realistically, the length of time that I want someone on Anavar in the off season in an intentional build is 8 weeks. Now, in prep, should we have it in for 8 weeks? Again, it really comes down to that individual's case. Does it make sense to have it in place? Have they already implemented multiple cycles? So at this point, this is just, another tack that we're rolling the dice, essentially hoping that they don't viralize. Do they have a long season ahead? Should we hold on to this wild card so that if we need it later down the line, we have it? I'm very minimal when it comes to putting enhancements in place. And on the conversation around other anabolics, and this is one that it's a little dicey because you're probably not going to get this from a non-UG source. But I do think if we're
Primo.
going a different route than Anavar, Primobolan would be an option as well, but not at the doses that I'm seeing. Like 50, 80, 100, I think that's extremely excessive. Dosing for that, I would say like for Bikini, 15, 30 milligrams a week, which I should clarify for the Anavar, what I was saying, with 2.5 to 5, that's per day.
And you bring up a really good point too. The two compounds you brought up, Anavar and Primo, are the two most highly faked compounds out there. If you go UGL, which is underground lab source, and because I'm part of like a compounding pharmacy now, I can tell you there is a massive discrepancy between quality on where you get it. There's a difference with things, not just that, but delivery mechanism, right? Is it a troche? Is it a pill? Like, how is it dosed correctly? Like, there's a million different factors that play into this here. but you can get a lot from a little if it is quality and if it's real.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good point to also understand that the method of delivery, there are differences there. So even getting a CMP before to make sure that someone's liver enzymes aren't already elevated.
Yes.
I also want to call attention to this. Notice how none of us have said SARMs. That's one that I don't think have a place in our sport. I think if we're going to go the anabolic route, Anavar or Primobolan is a better option. I will say I oftentimes find that if there's a question in accuracy of the compound, Evan, like you were describing, in regards to Primo, I will lean towards Anavar, even though it's going to be ingested orally. So, I mean, like it's going to cause some degree of liver enzyme elevation, not to the degree that I think a lot of people imagine, but it is worth something to note and to monitor with lab work. I think accuracy ultimately should determine the kind of anabolic we're using. But I'm really big on like if we have an athlete who is already seeing that biological decline in circulating androgens, I would lean more towards TRT as a starting point to pull out progress. And I mean, this is something like going into my last build in 24, I was very convinced. I'm like, you know what, I'm training right. I'm doing everything correctly. I'm probably going to need to do an off-season cycle. Historically, at this point, I've only used Anavar in season more to push that fullness at the end of a contest prep. Now, last year, I did a 16-week build. It was very intentional. It was very structured. I'm on 3.5 milligrams a week of TRT. I've been on TRT for 3 years. I saw incredible results. And that was the only PED I had in place. And again, it's not to say, hey, Cory got these results, go jump on TRT. It's really to highlight that a lot can be done with a little. That 3.5 milligrams is supporting normal to normal high levels. Like my serum levels of testosterone are 70 to 80 nanograms per deciliter. That's still within the female physiological range. And to see that I was able to put 4 inches on my glutes over the course of 16 weeks, largely that being muscle. I mean, like even at this point in my career, I was shocked how much could actually be pulled out of that when you're managing and you're monitoring your training and overall just adherence.
No, yeah,
Well,
I
that
love
I mean
all of it.
that
Yeah.
that can address a whole other topic, which is the the length of athletes like macro and micro cycles of training, right? Like the idea that they're competing year round, um, especially at the pro level. They're doing shows in the spring, the summer, and the fall, and then they're doing shows right at the beginning of the spring. Um, it's one of my big memories when I first started coaching pro bikini. I think it was 2017. I went on this full circuit and saw all these girls, and I didn't have anybody qualify for the Olympia, but I said I want to go watch the Olympia because I became a fan and friends with a lot of these girls. And I remember going to the Olympia and I saw a lot of these girls that were getting these points and they got to go to the Olympia. And I go to the Olympia at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. And at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, there was about 45 girls that were no longer Olympia qualified, and only 10 got to go to finals. And I thought, wow, all that to be done at 10 a.m. on Saturday at the Olympia. So like, and no one was there. There was a few people watching because it was at the expo. And it just dawned on me like, wow, they worked very hard and they got to start all over right now. So if you're not in that upper echelon of competitors at that level, you got to wonder like, okay, am I going to go through this again just to go get 36th place at the Olympia? It's it's a cutthroat sport, especially for a lot of athletes that start to identify as that I am a bikini Olympian. This is who I am. And they don't have a lot outside of that. And I see that quite frequently. It's a very tough sport mentally for some of the athletes, even I coach.
I couldn't agree more. And I do think being able to separate your identity and find value in who you are off stage, for me, that has allowed a very long span in the sport. For listeners who don't know, I started prepping for my first show. I was self-coached in 2014. At this point, I've done 14-ish, maybe 13 shows. But something that you said that, it really clicked for me was when you start looking at like the intention with getting on stage, especially at the pro level, you kind of have to ask, like, are you trying to just qualify for the Olympia to be in fifth callouts, or are you trying to be competitive? Are you trying to get the feedback from Tyler, from the judges, so that you can continue to make good strides? Or do you just want that blanket feedback that's like, yeah, you need more muscle, you need to be more conditioned? Because a lot of those girls are getting that kind of feedback. And it's just because the gap is so large. And on my pro debut, I competed 5 weeks after I turned pro. And it was very much, it was inspired because the judges at Junior USA's were like, hey, we want to see you on stage. And it felt really good about it. I'm like, let's see kind of where I stand. I know I can make improvements. I can come in a little bit tighter, improve the peaking process. And a lot of athletes at the time questioned, they're like, well, Ashley Kay is notorious for doing the mile high. Like, why would you want to compete against her in your pro debut? And I remember thinking, I'm like, that is like objectively one of the best competitors in our division, like in the sport. I'd love to be compared. I would love to, even if it is like, a second, third call out placing, I would love to still see where I stack up, because that gives me something to work on. That gives me direction.
Mhm.
For listeners who aren't familiar with my competitive history, because it's been a while, at that show, I got second to Ashley. It was a 1 point difference. It was very much in my mind. I'm like, this is an amazing pro debut. This is a great showing. And realistically, I do think that the athletes who are more oriented around placing, placing against high level, high caliber athletes, and can be, I would say, understanding that at the gate it might not be as successful, they might not get those top placings. I think in the long run, I think especially if their goal is to hit the Olympia stage or to win several pro shows, continue to elevate their competitive career, I think they're going to be better for it, rather than just kind of going to participate or qualifying in a way that maybe doesn't allow them to see out their fullest potential as an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, getting second at your pro debut, you're obviously over the moon. You're excited to hear your number in first call outs at your pro debut. For those that aren't familiar with pro bikini, it is, I mean, I just still remember the first time I went backstage with Natalie Matthews at the Clash, and I just looked around and I was like, oh my Lord, like it is not, you cannot compare it to NPC, you cannot compare it to nationals. It is the creme de la creme. It is girls that are literally working year round to improve their physiques. They have the best genetics. They know their bodies very well. They show up conditioned. It's just a completely different sport than amateur. And I think this is honestly sometimes when I have a consult with a new competitor and they're telling me their goals and all they're talking about are pros, and I literally go to NPC News Online and I go, okay, here's the show you're looking at doing. Here's the girls that competed there last year. And they're like, oh, I'm like, do not look at pro bikini as your like comparison. That is not going to be at your show. There is never going to be a girl at an NPC show that is capable of winning a pro show. It does not happen. That girl that's going to win the overall at that show is going to very much look like an amateur. And she might look like a standout, shape, muscle, beauty, those kind of things. But getting to that Olympia level is a series of years of like fine tuning your physique. So yeah, it honestly gets more people excited. I know it's not realistic, but I wish more amateur competitors were kind of highlighted in the sport, because we just see a highlight reel of, Amy and Ashley and these kind of girls that you're just like, wow, we talked about this, Evan, when I used to look at muscle magazines in the 90s and 2000s. When I decided to do my first bodybuilding show, in my mind, Jay Cutler and Ronnie Coleman were going to be in my class, not a bunch of regular dudes. And it
Yeah.
was a bunch of regular dudes. And it was much more fun. And I had a lot of fun. And I always tell people, go to a show before you decide to compete.
Yeah,
To me,
sure.
that's the sport is much more attainable than it can be made out to be on social media and in the highlight reels that we see.
And
And
I think that's a good way to even round out what we were talking about earlier, is when it comes to PEDs, remembering that like there's an aspect to this sport that you get to decide if you even enjoy. Like the amount of individuals who come to me who are like, I want to start prep and I want to start using Anavar, and what about Clen, and what about GH? And I'm like, you don't even know if you like being on stage. Like, it's for those who aren't familiar, like you are in very little clothing, you are putting on a performance. If posing doesn't come natural to you, that is going to be probably really uncomfortable. It's going to be a long day. You're probably going to be stressed, and that is not even getting into what it's going to take to get that lean. I think the level of body fat that is needed nowadays, I mean, is very difficult, and I think it's very costly from a health standpoint. And I think that's another reason that, like, being able to have the introduction of the fit model division, and having something that really is more so, I would say, closer to entry level. I see that as a positive because it gives people the opportunity to really explore: do I like the act of competing? Do I like the process that it takes to get on stage without that competitive pressure of, well, all of these girls are using not just one, but in many cases, several compounds or several types of PEDs for their first show. They're spending thousands of dollars on their suit, on the show day, on the makeup, on the tan. And I mean, like, that was one of the points I highlighted with the model division that I really appreciated, is that I feel like fiscally they made it a little more accessible, by putting caps on the suit, by ensuring or trying to encourage people to, like, not get crazy with the posing. Because I mean, like, how many times have we seen athletes who have a coach for bodybuilding, then they have a personal trainer, an in-person trainer, obviously, because many coaches who say they do training, they just put the training split and say train hard. Then you have a posing coach, then you have a chiro or a PT, and it's like, how, like, fortunate are you to be able to spend, like,
Yeah.
thousands of dollars each and every month? And that's not even including the cost of getting on stage, from entry fees to the actual glam to the suit that in many cases is $500 to $1,000. And to commit to that, invest in it without even knowing, do you want to do it again? I mean, that's insane.
Well, I think that's why they limited the ability to cross over, because I think it would have been very enticing for a lot of girls to cross over into fit model and bikini, and then you're easily going to double or triple your cost of being at a show. And so, yeah, I think they were intentionally thinking about, let's create something that isn't going to have a huge. I mean, Corey, you're going to laugh, but I used to have my girls go to like one of these makeup stores the night before the show to get their makeup done in 2016, 2017, 2015. Like, there were no makeup artists. There was like one or two. Now it's just accepted that you're signing up with someone. But yeah, you know, girls used to show up with the worst eyeshadow, tan their face. They would still win, right? It
Yeah.
was a different time, but the cost of competing definitely has created a little bit more, and I think when I look at the numbers being down, I actually asked one of the bigger suit makers, I said, are you selling less suits? And when she told me no, people are choosing to compete with different organizations, I thought, oh, I immediately thought, like, okay, so we're talking about some of the natural organizations, which made sense when they then announced that they're making a big push now for the natural bikini division. I thought it was a little quick that they added Fit Model literally like a couple weeks after they announced they were adding another natural pro qualifier.
Mm.
So clearly they're seeing something behind the scenes that's indicating to them they need to make a shift. Um, I, I, you know, I don't know if it's going to be as drastic as swift as what happened with the figure division, but it it could, if they're not careful. Pro bikini could become figure, and fit model could become what bikini was. Because I've already had a lot of former bikini pros that I've coached through their careers that have retired that have said, hey, when they start announcing fit model pro shows, I want to come back.
No, I think that's really exciting. And I think it's something that athletes who may have felt a little pigeonholed into the look that bikinis turned into, who, I mean, like, frankly, like, when we start looking at the density, the thing that I encourage athletes to consider is, like, yes, like, on stage, you might feel really good and like you might love your physique, but realistically, you're probably going to sit minimally 10 pounds, if not 20, over where you are on stage. And that's not to say that that's everyone across the board, but I think a lot of people, they kind of settle somewhere in between there. And I know for me, like, my upper body it feels pretty dominant, and it, largely that is structure. But if the bikini division were to continue to progress and they were to ask for more rear delts, more, I guess, more delts in general, more back development, that is something that I would consider and be like, do I actually want to look that way? Because I mean, like telling you, like going out right now, like wearing like normal non-gym clothes, I'm very aware of that physique when I'm a little bit heavier, when I'm not stage lean, when I'm not super shredded. It's like that is more muscle than I think I want to have if that were to continue to be the progression. So I think that's another consideration people have to really think about, especially if you're in bikini and you're like, you know what, I get this a lot where individuals be like, well, should I do wellness? Should I cross over? It's
Yeah.
like you're committing to a whole other side on the drug aspect of it, but you're also committing to living in a body that is going to be much denser, and you're likely going to have body fat on top of those muscles.
Yeah.
So that look could change very drastically from what you see on stage, and that needs to be a look that you love. It should largely be. You shouldn't hate the body that you're living in 9 months out of the year only to get ready for a show, love it for a few weeks, come out of it pretty rough, because that is the case for many people, only to then, kind of feel like, oh, I can't wait to get back on stage. And I think that's the cycle a lot of people find themselves in, swinging between their prep setting, their non-prep setting, is they convince themselves that, well, prep is the way that I get back to having that body that I love, not
Yep.
realizing the cost.
I've had a lot of conversations. I know a lot of people personally, people I coach, and just friends that really fall into that cycle of competing because that's the only time they feel comfortable in their own skin with the amount of muscle they have to carry on top of that. Yeah. Corey, I have a very specific question for you. What percentage of people that come to consultations with you, females obviously, would you find that do estrogen blockers like Navadex, and do you see a reason that would need to be implemented?
I would say 50% of consults, or I would say even current clients who have historically used them. I've historically used Nolvadex, not really understanding what it was doing, why it was needed. I was kind of fed the same thing, like, oh, it's because your skin is thick. No, I just didn't have muscle. That's really the spoiler for everyone. I think it can be used in some cases. I would say that there are less harsh compounds that are over the counter that you could put in place, but really the case use for something like Nolvadex, so tamoxifen, would be if the individual is truly estrogen dominant. So this is something I don't like to guess with. I like to
Yeah,
truly
one word.
look at labs. So I think for most women, when we're looking at like 7 days before their cycle, we should see a rise in estradiol. It's the second rise, so it's not going to be as high as that initial peak. We should also see progesterone coming up slightly. So this is going to help us understand really whether or not estradiol and progesterone are in balance, whether the athlete is having that ovulatory cycle. Now, I'm laying this all out because it is important to see that if someone's estradiol is above, let's say, 150, if we're seeing that, that very well could manifest as estrogen dominance if their progesterone is bottomed out. Now, obviously, cycle to cycle, this can vary. So it's important to also look at subjective markers. But I'll say I've had some individuals who come off hormonal birth control, so synthetic forms of estradiol and progesterone, who have experienced that kind of surge in estrogen dominance. So we're talking levels 2, 3, 400. And even in those cases, I've found that the over-the-counter supplements that are, I would say, more so a precursor to something like Nolvadex or an AI, DIM and calcium glucarate, those are two that will help clear some of that estrogen. They'll break it down from estradiol into weaker forms of estrogen. I've seen a lot of success with those. And where we want to be careful is that I think Nolvadex oftentimes is put in place, but then mismanaged. So even if,
Yeah.
we get that immediate response and we, sorry guys, my video.
I still hear you. You can keep
Okay.
I can
talking.
still hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just my battery. If, Paul, are we able to just edit this and I can just plop another one back in?
Well, to be honest, this is mostly a podcast we do upload to YouTube. So, I mean, I think
Oh.
we could just wind it down here. And we can continue this conversation on another podcast, like
Yeah,
this is,
yeah.
I mean, but
Oh,
people can still hear you, so the
Yeah,
information is
yeah.
coming across.
perfect. So yeah, just rounding that out with Nolvadex, I think it is typically mismanaged. So people will put it in, but realistically, then it can lead to that over suppression of estrogen, which, like I highlighted earlier, estradiol is needed for that conversion of GH to IGF-1, which is just a fancy way to say putting you in a better position to build muscle. There are also a slew of systemic benefits that you're going to get from estradiol. So the idea of just like blindly suppressing it without labs or just doing it because someone, is struggling to get conditioned, I think is oftentimes a misstep.
I think it's a worse. I mean, you're already suppressing these hormones by being low body fat, being low calorie, being high activity. Yeah, I think
I think a
estrogen
lot of
gets a
coaches
bad
just, yeah,
rap. Yeah, I think
a lot of
estrogen gets
coaches
a bad rap, but
just
it's
a
not.
lot of coaches just add Novodex in because they think it's going to make their athlete drier and harder. Um,
Well,
that's
and
just
some
what they
coaches
assume.
talk about it like it's gonna make somebody have a tie-in, and clearly it doesn't, because we can see
No,
results.
I can say having used it, I got incredibly lean when I worked with Shane in 21. I turned pro. I did objectively well on stage. But the next year without it, I got stupid peeled. Like I got so lean, like way too lean for bikini.
Yeah.
And that really it was nice to see that difference. Be like, okay, well, it wasn't the Nolvadex that
Yeah.
facilitated that level of conditioning.
And that's something I think a lot of people fall victim into as well, is they'll do something like you did, right? Or they'll have a coach prescribe Novodex, right or wrongly prescribe it, but they just think that's always what they're going to need to get conditioned. And they just take stuff blindly without thought behind it, without labs. Look, everything, I believe, not everything, but most things have a purpose if it's needed, right? But is if it's actually needed and be beneficial.
Absolutely. I think understanding mechanistically how these drugs work. So, from an athlete standpoint, I think listeners like take note of this. If you don't know what the drug is used for, if you don't know what it's good at doing, that should be your starting point when determining whether or not it should be in place. It's a very simple framework. Are you trying to lose fat? Are you trying to build muscle? Does this drug help you do one of these things? Does it help you do both of these things? Is this confirmed, or is this just pro lore of your coach saying, like with Nolvadex, oh, this will make you tighter, this will help you sharpen your like if that's the case, okay, that is anecdote, and we shouldn't completely throw that out, but you can access this information pretty readily. I do a lot of content specifically on PED education, and within my Patreon, I do put out for bonus solo episodes, tons of shorter, like 5-10 minute segments going over a lot of these drugs, explaining the use case for them, explaining when I think they're misused. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely take a look at my Patreon at Cory Fit.
Well, let's wrap it up here today, Cory, and let's just see what kind of discussion this generates, and if anything, I'd love to follow up with you. But how can people? So tell us about your podcast, and how. I assume everything's probably on your Instagram page.
Yeah. So the handle is the same for Instagram, YouTube, and Patreon. It's Cory, CORY_FIT. I do host a podcast, 4 episodes a month that are just me. Some are very heavy and I would say very dry, evidence based, mechanistic type content. Others are related to the coaching process, but I do bring on guests. I do shorter videos as well on YouTube bi-weekly. But then Patreon, I do offer those 4 bonus episodes, as well as I take viewers' questions, and I'll sometimes even turn those into hour-long podcasts. So I've had people, ask, hey, these are my labs. This is where I'm at in my prep. Here's what I'm taking. What are your thoughts? So that's always an option if someone's looking to get a little bit of insight. But I do offer one-time consultations for individuals who are already working with coaches. That's not something to be shady about. I have coaches who come on the consults too. We all talk about it. It really is set up more to serve as an interdisciplinary service, to work with the coach. If the client's already happy, I support that. I don't want you to leave your coach, but let's help get the client where they need to be. In addition, I do offer one-on-one coaching as well. So whether you lifestyle or contest prep, that is something I can do, and the information can all be found on my Instagram.
Yeah, I think that's a great service, because, like I said, it's been a struggle as a coach to find a trusted resource. Um, someone that is going to advocate for the women's best interest, not necessarily for them to get a trophy that the coach can then post about on Instagram and leave them in a worse place than they were before said trophy, that type of thing. Yeah.
It,
Yeah, and I think you're doing a great thing, Cory. I think you're doing a great thing. You're looking out for the individual in a very unselfish way, and we need more people like you.
Well, you're educated. You know, you have a medical background. You've also competed. You've been through the sport. You've also, you know, been around these substances. So that's kind of the perfect storm. Because to my knowledge, no one's going to medical school right now to study how to be a better bodybuilding coach.
no.
And unfortunately, that's kind of what you need. You almost need someone that's got a medical background that comes into the sport and kind of fills that gap. And you're doing that.
Yeah. And has an open mind too, and not just completely shut down.
Thank you. I am working on a project right now that'll be launched here in the next 2 to 3 months. It is an all-encompassing ebook to help individuals understand, both coaches and athletes, understand their lab work better. It is not to be in place of medical guidance or supervision, but just to bridge that gap. Because frankly, I mean, guys, even in nursing school, female endocrinology it's just so far behind. And it's something that when it comes to HRT and like just support of women who are experiencing that decline, I mean, it's often regarded as HRT is not safe or it's not something we do. Just tell them to stress less, get more sleep, take more walks, things like that. So I'll have that coming out. It's going to be dense, but it really is intended to help individuals make better decisions and make sense of certain gaps, I would say, that we see within our sport.
And I love you said that, Cory, too, because I've had a number of clients and friends that are on TRT because they need it, and they'll go to like their OBGYN and they'll say, I won't even run lab work because you're on it, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's a battle though, and on the on the public side of things, it's like I've gone to OBs who've just simply looked at my BMI, assessed me, and been like, "You're healthy," and I'm like, "Yeah, but my testosterone is 5. That's not healthy. I'm not ovulating. Like I my body fat is low. I take care of myself. I eat well. I work out. Like we should do something." And it's kind of just I don't know. It's the same story again and again. I hear from individuals. So I want to do what I can to put out information, put out tools, and help people make better decisions. Make the decisions you want to make, but just be informed about them. Really, that's my stance on this.
Well said. Well, thank you, Cory. I really appreciate you coming on. I think it's probably just the beginning of a conversation between us because I'm really interested in this stuff. As a coach who I just really want to provide the best, in pro physique, we've always, prided ourselves on providing the best service possible without overstepping our scope of practice. Contest prep coaching is its own practice. It's gotten complicated now with obviously coaches getting more involved in the hormone side of it, right or wrong. And, perhaps even some coaching teams are benefiting by financial benefits. If their athletes are taking hormones from a certain clinic, they're getting kickbacks. So I've heard the good, the bad, but I'd like to keep the conversation moving forward to where it's more of a holistic approach as a coach, where we're understanding things. I think that ebook is going to be a great idea. It's definitely something I'm interested in.
Well, thank you both, guys. I hope we can do this again sometimes, and I hope listeners found this helpful. Let us know. Let us know in the comments below, and if you want to see this again.
Yeah, so if you guys are still listening, comment below. Questions for Cory, things that we can talk about, topics for the future, just feedback on your thoughts on this episode, because typically, this is kind of an in-house. Lexi's on here, Evan's on here, or if we're swapping in another coach. Cory is probably the first guest we've had on here in a long time, and I was very particular about who I wanted on here. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, guys, on what you'd like to see. All right, thanks, Cory.
Thanks, Cory.
Bye, guys.